Well, contrary to what may be thought by the wider electorate, there is any amount of common sense within the coalition opposition in Canberra, but too infrequently it doesn't get a voice. Matt Canavan, of course, is a beacon of common sense. Alex Antich, the senator from South Australia, is all class. But these people can't get a Guernsey. The coalition is still far too woke, but there is a breath of fresh air. The new member for the rural electorate of Flynn in Queensland, Colin Boyce. Now, he was the state member for Callide in the Queensland Parliament, but he got onto the front foot immediately as a candidate, which is exactly what the coalition should be doing now. And Colin Boyce argued that a net zero emission target would entrench Australia into a lower standard of living, that it would be people in regional areas who'd bear the brunt of it. His electorate is dominated by emissions-heavy mining and agriculture. Agriculture never mentioned by Bowen as a victim of Labor policy. In Colin Boyce's electorate, mining and agriculture are the two biggest employers, and Colin Boyce is now the new federal member for Flynn, says a net zero policy would put an end to the coal-fired power station that's needed to power Gladstone's gas plants and alumina refineries. This is reality, common sense. Colin Boyce is also a farmer who said bluntly, if we walk away from the affordable coal-fired power, we're walking away from jobs. Now, remember, we were told at the last election, when the Teals got elected, it was all about net zero and climate change, and the coalition had to change and get with it. Really? Well, there was barely a swing against Colin Boyce, yet he was a brand new candidate. In fact, his two-party preferred vote was almost 54%. The Greens got 4% of the vote. Wouldn't you be fighting in the seat of Flynn? Because it was all mining, all agriculture. This is where you'd have to go up and make sure your policy stood up. The Greens got 4%. They were fighting against coal mines. In an outstanding maiden speech, Colin Boyce issued a warning to the wider electorate of Australia, and he said, quote, I say this, ordinary Australian people require and deserve the basics of life, food security, water security, energy security and national security. He threw in a little bit of Latin with it. He said, de omnibus dubitatum, question everything he said. Now, this bloke's now the Shadow Minister for Infrastructure, Transport and Regional Development. I'll talk to him in another interview about that. We're not about that tonight, but I can't see any infrastructure project going ahead with renewable energy. He joins me. Colin Boyce, congratulations, a magnificent maiden speech. That should be circulated to every politician. I suppose there are only about 10 in the House to hear you. But I've got to say to you a little bit of personal stuff. I can identify with that. You said, this bloke said in his maiden speech, and he was talking about me and himself, he said, I remember candles, kerosene lanterns, kerosene fridges, but he was a bit ahead of me. He's had 32-volt lighting plants. We didn't have any of them. Party line telephones. Yes, they existed where everyone could hear your conversation, but Colin, we weren't good enough for a telephone. There were no telephone wires anywhere, but mosquito nets, I remember them, and fly paper. He said there was a wood stove, that's me, and a wood heap, the axe and the chopping block, the chook pen, yep, where the eggs came from, and the garden where the vegetables grew. I'm with Colin Boyce on all of that. Trips to town were rare, yep, with the exception of the mailman who came weekly. And he said we'd see no one other than immediate family for weeks. Colin, good to talk to you. Oh, dear, you're a breath of fresh air. That speech should actually be on the front page of every paper around the country. Times have changed, we admit that, but not necessarily for the better, eh?
Oh, well, thank you, Alan. It's great to be on your program finally. Absolutely. And I remember those things well. And things have changed, and that's all because of the advent of affordable electricity, energy. That is what has driven us as a nation to develop our industry, our agriculture, and all of the things that we take for granted these days. One of the big problems that I see is that metropolitan Australia has become absolutely divorced from how the necessities of life get produced and how they get provided for them. And this is a real problem for us.
Absolutely. I'll come to that in a minute, but listen, don't you remember the fly paper? People wouldn't understand, but the flies ran into it and they got stuck. And then you sort of emptied the flies out. And the kerosene table lamps, my mother would turn them out after we were served dinner. Otherwise, we'd be eaten by the moths. So we ate in the dark. And the kerosene fridge, hey, gosh, we've left that behind.
No, that's absolutely right. That was the way we survived back in those days. And it's some time ago now. And, we're trying to live on a sustainable planet. I still have the kerosene fridges that I grew up with, and they still go. What happens to everybody's fridge now? When it stops working, you just take it down to the dump and you throw it away and go and buy another
That's
one.
it.
I mean,
Everything's got built
unsustainable.
today. Everything's got built-in obsolescence, hasn't it? You know, you get it for a while and then it's no good. I remember we used to have ice cream once a year, and it was made in the kerosene fridge on Davis gelatine. I remember, and you thought you were millionaires, and you had to go out and kill the chook if you actually wanted roast chicken. That was once a year. But you've made this very sensible point, or many sensible points. You said there's nothing like hunger to drive political change. Now, we're heading pitchfork into hunger if we think the new world can survive on renewable energy. But you mentioned Eastern Europe and a quarter of the world's wheat crop. How will this affect the rest of the world?
Look, absolutely, Alan. And Russia and Ukraine and Eastern Europe traditionally produces 1/4 of the world's wheat crop. That's a huge amount of wheat. Right now, over there, we see the political events unfolding. They're at war. The farmers are shooting bullets at one another. They are not producing the wheat that they should have. So it's a reasonable expectation to say that wheat crop production will be substantially limited to what it normally is. Therefore, you've got places like sub-Saharan Africa, which will be facing famine. And as we know, and the history books tell us this, Marie Antoinette got her head cut off because the peasants were starving. The Romanov family, they were executed for exactly the same thing. The peasants were starving. We see it unfolding right now in Sri Lanka, where a once self-sufficient nation who was produced enough food for itself, and a net surplus as a matter of fact, made this crazy political decision to ban agricultural fertilisers and agricultural chemicals, and now they are literally starving. And what has become of that? Political turmoil. They've invaded the political houses in Sri Lanka, and it's a basket case economy now.
They've run out the president. The president's been run out. The Rajapaksa's, the whole family's been run out. I mean, but in this country, you're talking about production. Some of the finest agricultural land, because it's understandable. The farmer has had drought swinging around his head for God knows how long. They come along and say, we'll give you double market price per acre. He says, oh, bugger this, I'll go and live in the Mornington Peninsula, or I'll live in Toowoomba. So some of the finest agricultural land is now being taken up with solar panel farms and wind turbines in our own country.
Absolutely, and the point to that is that there is very little agricultural land. First-class agricultural land, there's something like 2.5% of the land mass of Australia is classified as A-grade first-class agricultural land. And what we're seeing happening is these renewable energy companies building wind turbines, solar energy farms, all these sorts of things, and taking up this valuable food-producing land in the name of lowering carbon emissions for Australia. 1.6% of the world's carbon emissions is produced by Australia. If we literally turned everything off here in Australia, it would make absolutely no difference whatsoever.
Let's just come closer to home to our viewers. This bloke's electorate is twice as big as Tasmania, 132,000 square kilometres. Now, 3 coal-fired power stations in his electorate, Stanwell, Callide and Gladstone, 15 large coal mines. You think of the workers who are watching us here tonight, producing 90 million tonnes of coking and thermal coal this year, 15 coal mines, a CSG gas industry producing 25 million tonnes, this is Colin's electorate, of LNG, exporting to the world. So Colin, simple question, what happens to all this under Bowen's plan, the Albanese plan?
Well, that's right, and what will happen to it, and that's what concerns me the most. What will happen to people's jobs? What will happen to their livelihoods and their futures? What happens when you've got a house mortgage and you live in Gladstone and there's a proposal to shut down the coal industry when you rely on that? If you're an underground coal miner at Oakey Creek out in the back of the electorate up near Emerald there, and you're operating the continuous miner underground, you're on a salary of $250,000 a year. How are you going to replace a job like that in the renewable sector? If you're a dump truck driver at Callide Mine or at Anglo Coal, it's a $150,000 a year job. How are you going to replace these people's income with jobs in the renewable sector if you shut these industries down? what is Australia going to do for the economic black hole that will be created?
Brilliant.
Every time there's a boatload of produce goes out of the port of Gladstone, it's all about generating income and money for the Australian economy. That's what pays for our hospitals, our schools, our roads. It pays the wages of our public servants, of our policemen, of our nurses, all of those sorts of things. That's where it comes from.
I mean, this is unbelievable. You're just speechless. See, Gladstone, and we're not going to finish talking to Colin tonight, so we'll bring him back, but Gladstone is the home, it's the capital of his electorate. Gladstone, we all know where that is. It's home to Rio Tinto, Boyne Island Alumina Smelter, the Yarwun Alumina Refinery, the QL Refinery, one of the world's largest refineries, by the way, the QL Refinery. How do you power these outfits? I mean, Gladstone's the world's fourth largest coal exporting terminal. There's a huge agricultural sector in Colin's electorate, producing food and fibre for the whole world. Now, Colin, if you said, as you said in your maiden speech, brilliant maiden speech, the best for common sense that we've seen in ages, but you add heavy engineering, the transport sector, road, rail and shipping. Your electorate is an economic powerhouse that generates the wealth for Australia, and the Bowen proposal in energy policy destroys all of that.
Yeah, well, literally, what do? We're the people that will bear the brunt of the economic cost of this crazy energy policy that we see unfolding in Europe, where they are literally going to freeze, people will freeze to death this coming winter in Europe. We've seen Germany, who is possibly the world's most advanced technologically industrial nation on the planet, expose their national security all over a crazy energy policy that they've developed over the last 15 odd years that is just simply unreliable.
Right.
We are going down the same road in Australia here, and surely people can wake up to what's going on.
Okay,
it's unfolding before us right now.
Okay, we'll leave it there. The people I want to wake up are Peter Dutton and the opposition. I hope they've read this stuff. Colin, we'll leave it there. I'm going to have you back, but to our viewers out there, this is Colin Boyce, the member for Flynn, the Queensland electorate. Now, his maiden speech was on the 28th of July this year. You can find it in the Hansard, or you just Google it and you get hold of it, read it, hand it out, give it to people. The member for Flynn. So, Colin, we'll have you back next week. We're nowhere near finished. You've got a story to tell, and we're happy to let you tell it.
Thank you, Alan. Be happy to.
All right, there he is. Common sense, but common sense is not common, we know that. Colin Boyce, the federal member for Flynn.